And now it is time for the honorable mentions. For Walt Disney Animation Studios, I decided to dedicate this moment to a special technique that they didn't often use, but have proven to be one of the best at the craft: mixing hand-drawn animation with live-action footage. Of course, this hybrid is as old as animation itself. Even Walt Disney himself was one of the pioneers at the start of his career when he and his team made the Alice comedies. Since then, Disney always looked for ways to revolutionize and refine the technique as both filmmaking and animation grew more advanced over time. Some notable examples of upgraded versions of the art include movies like The Three Caballeros, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and Pete's Dragon, as well as Walt's TV shows like Disneyland and The Wonderful World of Color. But among all the moments they've created that blended live action with animation, none could ever be more iconic than the scene where a magical nanny, her lovably crazy jack-of-all-trades friend, and two kids jump into a chalk drawing and enter a delightful cartoon world. Sure, that is technically the only live-action animation hybrid scene of the movie, but it still must be noted, as the film is a very significant moment in Disney history. To this day, not only is it considered Walt Disney's greatest live-action movie, but it is also one of the greatest achievements of his lifetime, right up there with Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and Disneyland. Now, let's go back to 1964, when Disney released their supercalifragilisticexpialidocious feature, Mary Poppins.
It's the story of the Banks family during the start of the 20th century, who are in desperate need to find a nanny for the two children, Jane and Michael, since Mrs. Banks is busy advocating for women's right to vote, and Mr. Banks is way too preoccupied with his job as a banker. Many have tried and failed, but it wasn't until a practically perfect nanny named Mary Poppins came out of the clouds to take the job as a response to a letter she got that was written by the Banks children themselves. Now with their new nanny, along with her eccentric friend Bert, Jane and Michael's lives have been filled with magic, wonder, and lots of surprises both in their home and around London, as Mary also tries to fix the problem that's within the Banks family. And let's just say that it's not the kids that are in need of help. Back in the late 1930s, Walt Disney's daughters, Diane and Sharon, enjoyed reading the Mary Poppins book. Eventually, Diane showed it to her curious father, and after going through page after page, Walt found himself loving it as much as his girls do. So much so that he even felt that it was good enough to be turned into a feature film. But while he was determined to make his Mary Poppins movie, especially for his little girls, he had to face one of the biggest obstacles of his career that kept him away from making his dream a reality for several years. It's not money this time, but rather Pamela Lyndon Travers, the original author of the Mary Poppins books. After she refused the first time, Walt thought that it was probably because he was known as a cartoon man with no actual experience with making live-action features. But then he later found out that Travers was just a really hard egg to crack who never liked the way Hollywood adapted books into movies. For more than 20 years, no matter who tried to convince her, whether it be Walt himself, his brother Roy, Disney representatives, or even another studio wanting to adapt the book, she always stood her ground and refused them all. It wasn't until 1961 when Travers ultimately caved in and sold the film rights to Disney, but only on the condition that she works on the film as a consultant. At first, Walt was cool with it, even invited her to the studio to work on the writing with writer Bill Walsh, story artist Don DeGrady, and songwriters Robert and Richard Sherman. However, if they thought it was tough just to get the film rights from her, they would later discover that it was only going to get worse from there. For the Disney team, they thought that they were making something great, taking the narratives of some of the chapters in the books and stitch them together into somewhat of a cohesive story, while also altering some elements to make them more charming. But for Travers, anything that wasn't exactly like how she wrote it in the books was terrible, and did not hold back on her criticisms towards any of their creative decisions.
Now we come to my notes here, my typewritten notes. It is integral to the book and to the story in whatever form it's presented that Mary Poppins should never be impolite to anybody. Not a change of heart, because he's always been sweet, but worried with the cares of life. We get the comedy out of this grave, quiet, polite person through which all the strange magic happens. No, don't make it like that.
Rather it be their depiction of Mary Poppins using the Sherman's whimsical original musical numbers instead of her preferred popular Edwardian songs, or especially the animation, it was almost as if everything they were doing to make a Mary Poppins movie was wrong. However, regardless of how she may have felt of their choices, it was ultimately Walt Disney who had the final say, and thus, many of the team's creative decisions ended up in the final cut. It was a battle between creative heads that was so heated at the time that it would later be known as one of the most popular feuds about making a Hollywood movie, one that would be transcribed in the 2005 P.L. Travers biography, Mary Poppins She Wrote by Valerie Lawson. The historical moment was also turned into several films, including the documentaries The Real Mary Poppins and The Shadow of Mary Poppins, and a 2013 movie called Saving Mr. Banks, featuring Emma Thompson as Travers and Tom Hanks as Walt Disney. Once they finally settled with a script, they were ready to go and find their actors to help bring the pages to life. There were some obvious choices like David Tomlinson as George Banks and the voice of Poppins' Umbrella, Glynis Johns as Winifred Banks, Ed Wynn as Uncle Albert, and Karen Doctris and Matthew Garber as the children Jane and Michael respectively, which the kids previously worked together on their movie debut in the 1963 Disney film, The 3 Lives of Tom and Cena. But then came the choice of Mary Poppins, where the team had to do some searching in order to find who would be practically perfect for the role. Disney had plenty of considerations for the right actress like Bette Davis, Mary Martin, Hayley Mills, and Angela Lansbury, but the Mary Poppins he was looking for was actually found on Broadway. In 1962, Walt went to New York and watched a production of Camelot, where he discovered an actress that stood out from the rest that played the role of Queen Guinevere, Julie Andrews. At the time, she was becoming a noteworthy actress of the stage with breakthrough performances like her Tony-nominated role of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, and the lead in Rodgers and Hammerstein's television musical adaptation of Cinderella. In the early 1960s, when Warner Brothers was starting to make their film version of My Fair Lady, Jack Warner decided to go against casting Andrews as Eliza. Nothing against her personally, it was just that she wasn't a popular name that could make the feature a guaranteed success, which was why Warner hired the more famous Audrey Hepburn to play the lead. But despite not being a household name, her performance in Camelot not only won over Walt, but also the crew who got to see a part of it through the Ed Sullivan Show. So when Disney went backstage and offered her the role of Mary Poppins, she was hesitant at first, since she was pregnant with her first child. But Walt assured her that he could wait, and once she had her baby a few months later, she was ready to make her feature debut as the magical nanny, to which she fit the role so well that it resulted in the very rare moment of Travers actually approving of a decision made by Disney. Walt also hired Andrews' then-husband, Tony Walton, to design the costumes and sets. As for the role of Bert, Walt decided to give it to a man that he immediately connected with after meeting him for the first time, Dick Van Dyke. Dyke also wanted to play the part of Mr. Dawes Sr., which Disney was hesitant at first, but managed to convince him after a test screening. While Bert would later be considered one of Dick's most memorable and beloved performances, his accent...
Oh, what, ladies and gents, comical poem, suitable for the occasion, extemporized and thought up before your very eyes,
is anything but. Although it's all in good-hearted fun, it is unanimously agreed that the worst thing to ever come out of the movie is Dyke's botched-up attempt of a Cockney accent. Some even consider it to be one of the worst accents in film history. Luckily though, Dick did get his chance to apologize, and the British still love him all the same.
For one thing, I'm assuming but after 60 years of bad jokes, I'm off the hook for excoriating the Cockney dialect, huh? Thank you.
On a side note, Dick was also the one who recommended to Walt to bring on board Mark Bro and Dee Dee Wood to be the choreographers. In order to bring the magic of Mary Poppins to life, the movie used a wide variety of visual effects and camera tricks like wiring, stop motion, and audio animatronics. Among Walt's movies during his lifetime, this was one of, if not the most effects he ever put in a single film, since he wanted to include all the tricks he knew to make this one stand out. But from all these effects, the crowning visual achievement of this movie is the sodium vapor process, a predecessor of the green screen that was created by Walt Disney's longtime collaborator, Iwerks. This also allowed the cast to make them look like they're either flying on the sets of Albert's house, standing in front of the wide shots of London that are actually painted backgrounds by Peter Ellenshaw, and most memorably, jumping into the animated world of one of Bert's drawings. As the actors were doing what they can to imagine themselves in an animated jolly holiday on their carousel horses, and Dick Van Dyke unleashing his miming skills, the animation team, led by Ham Lusk, went to work on crafting the scenes and working around the actors to add them in their shots and for the characters to seamlessly interact with them. One animator who is often noted for his work in the scene is Frank Thomas, who had the extra challenge of animating the penguins and have them dance with Dick Van Dyke. Ever since Walt got the approval to make the movie, Robert and Richard Sherman were immediately on board to provide the songs for the feature, since the brothers and Disney were all in sync with which chapters in the book they believed could work for the picture. While tough to get through Travers and her harsh distaste for their style, the brothers found inspiration in their personal lives, the turn-of-the-century vaudeville style, and in the book for songs like Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, I Love to Laugh, Let's Go Fly a Kite, and even Step in Time was based on the Old English song Knees Up, Mother Brown. And then there was Feed the Birds, a song that Mary Poppins sang to the children about an old woman on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral who sells bags of breadcrumbs meant to feed the birds, which was the final performance of actress Jane Darwell. Walt Disney may have never said it himself, but the brothers knew that it was his favorite song they had ever written. For the rest of his life, at least once a week, he would ask them to come to his office just to play Feed the Birds on the piano. Throughout production, over 30 songs were written for the feature. But of course, many of them had to be taken out because they were either not good enough or to cut down the movie's running time. Some of them, however, would be recycled for another project, including the right side for the series Welcome to Pooh Corner, the beautiful Briny for Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and Land of Sand changed its lyrics to become Trust in Me for the Jungle Book. After keeping his promise to his girls for nearly 25 years, Disney finally created the Mary Poppins movie he always wanted and had a glamorous premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater on August 27th, 1964. And saying that the result was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious would not be enough to describe its success. Critics were giving the movie some of the biggest praise they've ever given to a Disney movie, calling it a true triumph of cinema with some of the best examples of visual effects, acting, production design, choreography, and music combined together to create more than 2 hours of pure joy. At the box office, it was a spectacular hit, turning its $4 to $6 million budget into the highest grossing movie of 1964 with a profit of $28.5 million. After its re-release in 1973 and 1980, the film earned a domestic total of $102 million. The revenue was later used to buy the land in Central Florida that eventually became Walt Disney World and to build the workshop that made the audio animatronics at the Disney parks for several years, even naming the shop after the movie as Maypo. A few months later, Mary Poppins received the most nominations ever given to a Disney movie, appearing in 13 categories, including giving Walt Disney his only Best Picture nomination. It was also nominated for Best Director for Robert Stevenson, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction in Color, Best Cinematography in Color, Best Best Costume Design and Color, Best Musical Score, and Best Sound. But at the same time, it also won 5 Oscars for Best Visual Effects, along with winning a Special Technical Achievement Award for the sodium vapor process, Best Original Score, Best Song for Chim Chim Cheree, Best Editing, and Best Actress for Julie Andrews, which she also won a Golden Globe and a BAFTA. The movie also got 3 additional Golden Globe nominations, won 2 Grammys, and was later put on several lists of the greatest movies and movie moments, including the American Film Institute's Top 100 Best Songs with Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious at number 36, and at number 6 on their Top 100 Best Musicals, along with being added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2013. As for P.L. Travers, she never got an invitation to the premiere and had to go as far as embarrass an executive to the point of making them have her over. After watching the feature, while everyone else was giving it high praise, no surprise, she did not like what she saw. She even tried to talk to Disney regarding some changes she wanted to make to the film, like getting rid of the animation, but the only thing Walt said to her was,
"Pamela, that ship has sailed."
From then on, for the rest of her life, she always had a grudge against the feature, mainly for the ways the Disney team ignored her demands so they could make their own version. Years later, she even wrote in her last will and testament that if a stage adaptation of Mary Poppins would ever happen, then no one who worked on the movie should be allowed to be a part of it, especially the Sherman brothers. However, despite whatever feelings she may had over her experience with making the movie or how it is compared to the books, Travers never really thought that the movie was bad. In fact, years after the movie's release, she admitted that the feature itself was actually pretty good.
Well, it's still being shown all over the world.
Yes, so they tell me. I've seen it once or twice, and I've learned to live with it. It's glamorous, and it's a good film on its own level, but I don't think it's very like my books.
Following afterwards, Mary Poppins became a proud and prominent member of the Disney family, often featured at the Disney parks like in the parades and a segment in The Great Movie Ride, and released The Cat That Looked at a King, an animated short made for the film's 40th anniversary DVD that featured Julie Andrews reprising her beloved role. Around the same time as the short, Disney and theater producer Cameron McIntosh teamed up to create a stage musical version that combined elements from the original books and the Disney movie, which opened on the West End at the end of 2004 and came to Broadway 2 years later. The show ended up receiving a taste of the film's success, where it received some decent reviews, but a lot of love for the technical effects, along with winning 2 Laurence Olivier Awards and a Tony for Best Scenic Design, and had a successful long run on both sides where the original West End production at the Prince Edward Theatre stayed for more than 3 years, while the Broadway version was at the New Amsterdam Theatre for more than 6 years until it was replaced with the stage version of Aladdin. Over the years, the studio wanted to develop a sequel to Mary Poppins, but with every attempt, it was always shot down either because of casting problems or P.L. Travers was still being as difficult and strict as ever. It wasn't until in late 2018 when Disney finally made that sequel they always wanted called Mary Poppins Returns, where the beloved nanny, well, returns to Jane and Michael, now grown up, to help them in their time of need after the passing of Michael's wife. Like the stage musical, the sequel was a moderate success, earning $349.5 million at the box office, and the critics felt that, while it borrowed a little too heavily from the original, it is still a well-crafted feature that captured the spirit of the first film, and Emily Blunt proved to be a worthy successor to Julie Andrews for the role of Poppins. The sequel was also highly recognized during awards season, where it was nominated for a Grammy, 4 Golden Globes, 4 Oscars, and 5 Annies, winning 2 of them for Best Character Animation in a Live-Action Production and Best Animated Special Production. They say that Walt Disney's greatest accomplishments are the projects that he was the most committed to bring to life and that he was the most involved with. Mary Poppins is one of the best examples to that testament, spending over 20 years trying to make it happen, and once he got the permission that he was looking for, he and his team let out everything they know to make the feature an unforgettably magical experience. So much so that it is still considered to this day as one of the best Disney movies ever made, and resulted in a major cultural impact that became a positive influence to Hollywood, especially when it started the movie career of a legendary actress. But if nothing else, Mary Poppins will be known for generations as a delightful cinematic classic, where the performances, the choreography, the effects, the designs, the animation, and the songs all come together to give audiences of all ages a sense of fun and happiness throughout its over 2-hour running time. Disney may have made many great features over the years, but Mary Poppins is the only one that is practically perfect in every way.
However, going back to the mix of live action and animation, Mary Poppins only had that one scene that featured the mixed mediums. Back then, it was almost unheard of for an entire movie to use this hybrid technique, where every scene featured a live actor interacting with a hand-drawn cartoon character. It wouldn't be until 24 years after Mary Poppins where one of the most technically and creatively ambitious features was released, and forever revolutionized the art of visual effects, animation, and the way we pay homage to the golden age of Hollywood. Not to mention that many have credited this for bringing the popularity of animation back to the mainstream for the first time since the days of Walt Disney. And who knew that all it took to crack that case was a disgruntled, washed-up detective and a cartoon rabbit trying to prove his innocence? Yes, 1988 was a milestone year for animation, thanks to the release of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Down in 1947 Hollywood, where humans and cartoon characters worked together, one of Toontown's biggest stars, Roger Rabbit, was accused of murdering the owner of Acme Corporation, Marvin Acme, since it was discovered that Acme had a private night with Roger's wife Jessica playing patty cake. Literally. The only person whom Roger can rely on to prove that he didn't do it is Eddie Valiant, a private investigator who used to be recognized for saving Toons, but now resents them and became an alcoholic due to the death of his brother. It took some time to convince him, but after finding some curious clues that could indicate the rabbit's innocence, he reluctantly agreed. Now the two team up to find Marvin Acme's real killer and escape the wrath of Judge Doom and his Toon Patrol so that Roger doesn't die from the dip. Back in 1981, Disney bought the film rights to a newly released book called Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe, a murder mystery where humans and comic strip characters coexist that tells the story of Roger's temporary clone teaming up with Valiant to find out who killed the original Roger. They knew they had to alter a good amount of the source material, like switching the comic characters with ones from cartoons, but then CEO Ron Miller saw the opportunity of turning the book into the company's next big hit. As Disney hired a whole crew to test out what they could do for the feature, including Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman writing 2 drafts for the script, and an animation team led by Daryl Van Siders to test the hybrid technique, Robert Zemeckis wanted to come in and be the director. However, Disney told him no because he was a relatively new and unknown filmmaker at the time who so far only directed box office bombs. After that, though, the project never really went anywhere, since the early 1980s was a very troubling time for the company. It wasn't until in 1985 when the new CEO that replaced Miller, Michael Eisner, reignited the Roger Rabbit idea with Amblin Entertainment, led by Steven Spielberg, Kathleen Kennedy, and Frank Marshall. The discussion started out tough about who gets the profits and having a hefty $50 million budget, but they all agreed to reduce that to $30 million. But Spielberg got to have the majority of creative control and the box office earnings, while Disney could have all the merchandising rights. Originally, Terry Gilliam was asked to be the director, but after he passed on the offer because it seemed too technically challenging for him, they returned to Zemeckis to finally give him the job, since he then proved himself worthy of being a Hollywood director after working on big hits like Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future. When they brought back Price and Seaman to work on the script, they took some inspiration from real life to help shape the story and its components. The Ink and Paint Club was noted to be compared to New York's Cotton Club. Judge Doom's goal to getting rid of all the Toons shared similarities to Hitler's final solution, and the motive of taking down Toontown to build a freeway was based on both the 1974 film Chinatown and the downfall of the Pacific Electric Railway during the 1940s. Before getting into the technical job, one of the toughest tasks for this picture was to find the live-action leads, the hero Eddie Valiant and the villain Judge Doom, each with their own list of notable actors that were in consideration, but didn't get in for a variety of reasons. In the case of Valiant, there was Harrison Ford, who was too expensive, Chevy Chase and Eddie Murphy said no, and Bill Murray lost his chance to accept the part. But in the end, the role went to Bob Hoskins.
Toons gets him every time.
As for Judge Doom, it was all about finding the right amount of scary and lovably evil to make him a formidable enemy for Eddie and Roger. As Christopher Lee turned it down, some like Tim Curry ended up feeling too scary, while John Cleese was not scary enough. It wasn't until Zemeckis brought in Christopher Lloyd soon after playing Doc Brown in Back to the Future to take on the villainous role.
I'll catch the rabbit, Mr. Valiant. Then I'll try him, convict him, and execute him.
And with almost everyone in place, there was just one more key member to get in order to make the feature: the animation director. Sure, they could have just stuck with Daryl Van Siders from the early tests, but they wanted someone better. Someone who is not afraid of breaking the animation rules to take the medium to a whole new level, and capable of making hand-drawn characters move in 3D environments while the camera moves around. And within the industry, there was one guy who was quite well known for doing just that. At first, it wasn't easy to get animator Richard Williams to be a part of the team, especially when he had a massive distaste for what he referred to as Disney's bureaucracy and did not want to set foot in Los Angeles. So to compromise, the animation team, mainly comprised of the artists from Disney Animation, were split into two, where one group was working at Williams' studio in London, while the other stayed at Disney's in Los Angeles with animator Dale Baer in charge. The producers and Disney also agreed that after the film, they would help the distribution for his longtime passion project that he was working on for more than 20 years by that time, The Thief and the Cobbler. Ultimately though, that deal never happened, and Williams later signed on with Warner Brothers to finish that job. I could go on about what happened to that film, but believe me when I say that it's a long story. Anyways, back on to Roger Rabbit. On top of their technical mission they wanted to pull off with a mix of live action and animation, Spielberg wanted to fill the screen with not just any cartoons, but instead with the most popular animated characters of the golden era. Disney was already secured, but Steven also managed to bring on board the characters of Warner Brothers, Universal, Fleischer, Felix the Cat, and MGM. In the case of Warner Brothers though, they were a little more cautious and agreed to let him use their characters on the condition that their biggest characters share equal amount of screen time as Disney's. The solution the team figured out was to have these characters appear at the same time to guarantee their equal share, including the piano duel featuring Donald and Daffy, and the fall from the skies of Toontown with Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny. Seriously, that scene is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's like a moment that's worth hanging on your wall. It's just so perfect that you never want to forget it. Speaking of Bugs, voice acting legend Mel Blanc signed on to reprise his roles as the Looney Tunes characters, with the exception of Yosemite Sam, making this one of the last times he voiced them before his death in 1989, and Mae Questel returned for her final performance as Betty Boop. However, Spielberg did not get all the cartoons he wanted. There were several that he wasn't able to secure the rights to, like Tom and Jerry, Casper, Little Lulu, the Terrytoons characters, and Popeye, which was part of the reason why they had to take out the scene of Marvin Acme's funeral where many of those characters were featured. What made the movie a massive risk to make was that nobody in the production had any idea what the final product would end up looking like, with the live-action crew just working on their aspect, while the animators were focusing on bringing their characters to life, and both had no computers to help them out. With the live-action crew, the actors, especially Bob Hoskins, started by going through some rigorous mime training so that they could act with imaginary characters, knowing how to look at Toons like Roger in the eyes and feel their weight as they carry them. Then they did a first take with rubber dummies to practice the staging and framing the shots. And once it was time for the real take, the dummies were taken out and the actors put their miming skills to work, while the voice of Roger, Charles Fleischer, was behind the camera saying his lines and even dressed up in a rabbit costume to help get him more in character. And yes, he even wore the bunny ears.
Well, I've just approached this like I would approach any role. I don't consider this to be a voiceover. If anything, it had to be categorized, it's off-camera acting. I'm just there doing it. I prepare in the same way I would prepare for any role. I learn my lines. Just a minute, please. I'm doing an interview.
Also, the engineers used their specially crafted props to make it look like the cartoons are interacting with them, along with robotic rigs to have the characters fully use the props, like Baby Herman holding his cigar, Smartass pointing his gun towards Eddie, and Roger breaking plates on his head. They also had puppeteers to freely move the objects around without any rigs supporting them. But among all the scenes, the two most difficult to technically pull off were the Ink and Paint Club, which is a combination of all the visual techniques working together in a massive set with penguin waiters, Jessica playing around with some of the audience, and Donald and Daffy's piano duel, and the chase scene with Benny the Cab, where Hoskins and a stunt driver have to look like Eddie and Roger are driving for their lives on a cartoon car. As for the animation itself, Zemeckis' goal with that was to combine the best parts of each cartoon studio from the 1940s, featuring the visual standards of Disney, the clever characters of the Looney Tunes, and the wild humor of Tex Avery. Some of the original characters were designed to reflect upon the popular trends of the 1940s. Roger himself is like a Frankenstein of cartoon features like Droopy's patch of red hair, the nut-shaped head that's commonly found in the works of Tex Avery, Bugs Bunny's cheeks and ears, Porky Pig's bow tie, Mickey Mouse's yellow gloves like in his posters, Goofy's overalls, and an American color scheme of red, white, and blue. As for Jessica, she is meant to be the ultimate femme fatale from the height of the classic film noir movies, with proportions purposely exaggerated to emphasize that only a cartoon could have that kind of body. Once the animators completed their job, they sent their animations to Industrial Lights and Magic so that they combined them with the live-action shots and give the cartoon some visual depth, including highlights, tone mats, shadows, and extra effects when needed, like Jessica's sparkling dress. While the deal for the budget was agreed for $30 million, it's no surprise that the scale of what the team wanted to accomplish ended up going beyond that, where the movie's price tag ultimately went up to around $50 to $70 million. As much as he believed in the film, Michael Eisner was ready to shut down the whole thing before it ended up costing too much money. But after a heated debate, then head of Walt Disney Pictures, Jeffrey Katzenberg, managed to convince him to keep the film alive, mainly because of how it would be worth it for Disney to have this big collaboration project with Steven Spielberg.
You are one lucky rabbit.
I would say that title belongs to Oswald, but when's the last time anyone talked about him?
Then again, Michael, Jeffrey, and Roy E. Disney all agreed that the movie was pushing the envelope a little too far to have it be considered a Disney feature. Yet they couldn't do anything about it because the filmmakers were given the final say on the creative choices, and Zemeckis refused to change anything from the picture. As a result, they agreed to release the movie under their more adult-oriented banner, Touchstone Pictures, and they were ready to bring Toontown to theaters on June 22nd, 1988, which was accompanied by the National Film Board of Canada animated short, The Cat Came Back, which was later nominated for an Oscar. And while Roger Rabbit was portrayed as Hollywood's biggest star in the movie, It turned out to be a case of life imitating art. Critics were calling it one of the most groundbreaking feature in years, a true cinematic marvel to behold with its innovative technique of mixing live action with animation, accompanied by an engaging story filled with enjoyable characters played by noticeably talented actors. As for their issue with the budget, it didn't matter how much it cost because it was a massive success at the box office, earning $156.5 million domestically and a worldwide total of $329.8 million. The movie then went on to grab some trophies for its tremendous work, including 3 Oscar nominations for Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, and Best Sound, and winning 3 Oscars for Best Sound Editing, Best Film Editing, and Best Visual Effects, on top of a Special Achievement Award for Richard Williams. And in 2016, the movie was chosen to be in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Despite giving it the touchstone label on its release, Disney wasted no time to embrace the rabbit as their own, and immediately displayed it as one of their greatest achievements and their next biggest franchise. Soon after the movie, Disney's Florida animation team started out by working on 3 Roger Rabbit shorts that were released in theaters with a feature film. These include Tummy Trouble in 1989, Roller Coaster Rabbit in 1990, and Trail Mix-Up in 1993. There was a 4th animated short called Hair in My Soup where Roger works as a waiter for a fancy restaurant, but was ultimately scrapped after Disney and Amblin split. In 1991, not only did the author of the source material, Gary K. Wolfe, made a sequel novel that was more connected to the movie called Who Plugged Roger Rabbit, but Disney also created an entire land based on the movie called Mickey's Toontown at Disneyland and Tokyo Disneyland, where they even have a Roger Rabbit dark ride called Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. There was a Toontown that was at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, but that had to close down in 2011 to make room for the expansion of Fantasyland. But as expected from Roger, even when he was the most celebrated rabbit in Hollywood, he always found a way to get in trouble. When the movie was released on Laserdisc in 1994, there was one quick scene where, if paused at the correct spot, it revealed that Jessica was not wearing any underwear. And since that discovery, Disney was quick to cut out that shot for any future releases. Also, in 2001, Gary K. Wolfe sued Disney claiming that they still owed him royalties for Roger Rabbit's success. It took Wolfe years and several trials to make the company pay, but he ultimately won 4 years later, yet only received around $180,000 to $400,000 in damages instead of getting the $7 million he said that he was owed. With a major feature like this, some may think that it's rather surprising that Disney never jumped to the opportunity to make more Roger Rabbit movies. Actually, they and many others tried, but several circumstances ultimately prevented the plan for a follow-up to happen. A year after the movie's release, Spielberg was planning a prequel called Roger Rabbit Toon Platoon, where Roger and a human named Richie Davenport joined the army during World War II, along with many other recognizable characters, so that they could stop the Nazis and save Jessica. The movie would have also established how Roger started in a Midwestern farm looking for his mother, and how he met his wife along the way. However, a few years later, Spielberg quit the project because he no longer felt like Nazis were a laughing matter after he directed Schindler's List. It wasn't until in 1997 when Disney wanted to try another shot at a Roger Rabbit prequel, this time called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit, where the World War II setting was switched to a musical about Roger's rise to fame from Broadway to Hollywood. Some of Disney Animation's top talents at the time were even hired to be in charge of the project, including Eric Goldberg being the animation director, and Alan Menken signed on to be the executive producer and to write 5 songs for the picture. The only song that was known to be made for this was This Only Happened in the Movies, which was later made public on Kerry Butler's debut album in 2008. Another significant difference from before was the use of CGI to bring the tunes to life, along with a complete redesign for Roger. However, considering that the use of computers would come with an extremely high cost that would put the budget over $100 million, Eisner ultimately decided to just pull the plug. The only other attempt to make a prequel was much later in 2013. After writing the third book of the series, Who Whacked Roger Rabbit, Gary K. Wolfe and Eric Von Wadeka created a proposal for a buddy comedy called The Stooge, which was also an animated remake of the 1952 film of the same name that would have starred Roger and Mickey Mouse, and had its own interpretation of how the rabbit met Jessica. But ultimately, nothing ever came out of it. Throughout the 2000s to the present day, Disney still attempted to make several lesser-known ideas for a Roger Rabbit follow-up, including a sequel set in the 1950s that would have featured the ghost of Eddie Valiant. But as the years went by, the chances of Roger's comeback were gradually diminishing. Not only because of the death of Bob Hoskins in 2014, but also because Disney didn't find Roger to be as profitable as he used to be. Not to mention how Jessica's presence in recent years might cause some trouble for the company. But regardless of how people view Roger or Jessica, or even if a follow-up would ever happen, there will always be the original that will be remembered as one of Disney's most groundbreaking cinematic achievements. With the combination of the greatest talents of the industry at the time, they were able to place cartoon characters in live action in ways that the world had never seen before, taking the medium of animation and visual effects to a whole new level, combined with taking the best of film noir and classic cartoons and create a wonderfully unique experience that no other movie ever replicated since, on top of delivering possibly the most unbelievable crossover ever put on film, which resulted in a newfound interest in animation from the public that later started a renaissance for both the medium and especially for Disney. It truly is a movie like none other, and that's what makes Who Framed Roger Rabbit possibly the greatest tribute to the cartoons of Hollywood's golden era.
That's all, folks.
Care for an encore? After all, we do have to make the most out of the plus of this show. For the final honorable mention, it is time that we take a look at the Forbidden One. The one that Disney is trying ever so hard to lock up deep in the Disney vault in the hopes that it would end up long forgotten by the sands of time. However, not even a multi-billion-dollar corporation is capable of making the public forget. What began as Walt Disney turning the stories of his childhood into his first feature film that's mainly live action gradually became one of the company's most iconic features, and also their most problematic. Of course, as society evolves to become more progressive and diverse, the discussions about this movie were becoming more and more problematic, and as they adapt to the modern times, Disney's solution is to continuously distance themselves from the film altogether. But regardless of which side people take on this topic, I think we can all unanimously agree that the feature's history and legacy is a truly fascinating story that must be told. It is often referred to as Disney's most controversial movie, but many just simply call it Song of the South.
It's the story of Johnny, who moved to his grandmother's plantation in Georgia due to his parents momentarily splitting up because of his dad's newspaper job in Atlanta. Upset that it wasn't the vacation with his parents he thought it would be, he tried to sneak out, but suddenly met an old wise man named Uncle Remus, who grew a bond with the kid and tells him the animated stories of Brer Rabbit, where in each tale, he always finds a way to cleverly escape from the hungry hands of Brer Fox and Brer Bear. Now with the help of Uncle Remus, Johnny makes the most out of his time in the plantation and learning the lessons from the Brer Rabbit stories as he meets new friends and confronts his own troubles. After the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Walt Disney went on a property shopping spree in the hopes of turning those stories into his next feature film. One of them that he purchased in 1939 for $10,000 was a series of books known as the Uncle Remus stories by Joel Chandler Harris, where each book contains a collection of tales and songs featuring Brer Rabbit narrated by a fictional old African-American storyteller from a plantation in the late 1800s. Disney's first plan with the feature was to make it an entirely animated feature, where the stories could also serve as their own animated shorts, similarly to the package films of the 1940s. As the movie ultimately contained 3 of the original Uncle Remus stories like Brer Rabbit Earns $1 a Minute, The Tar Baby, and The Laughing Place, there were several other story ideas that never made the cut. These include Brer Rabbit's gambling addiction being the cause of all his problems, a plot where he convinces Brer Fox to ride him like a horse to a party, another where the rabbit disguises himself as a ghost to scare off Brer Bear, and Uncle Remus himself telling the animals to build a church so that predator and prey can be at peace with one another.
Alrighty, that looks pretty good. Now just put in the final touches, make some minor edits. I need to stop talking to myself while editing. And, oh wait, no. Okay, and, oh wait, no, not yet. Okay, and done. Well, my work here is done. Thank you for having me on board, Matt.
However, after going through the 1941 Union strike and received a major blow from World War II, causing the movie from the early 1940s to flop and leaving the company financially damaged, Walt and his brother Roy agreed to start making live-action films as a way to make additional profits for the company, using the Uncle Remus movies as their first experiment where the feature is mostly live action, but have a third of the picture be animated with the Brer Rabbit stories to still have it be recognized as a feature from the man behind Snow White and Mickey Mouse. Plus, it seemed like a good story to cash in on the massive success of 1940's Gone with the Wind. When production began in 1944, the first writer Walt hired was Dalton Raymond, which was his first and only screenplay he had ever written. A risky move, but that was because Disney wanted a professional Southern writer to make the script instead of the usual team he had at the animation studio. However, that was when Walt discovered that even during his time, he couldn't be like Joel Chandler Harris and just get away with letting a white man, especially from the South, write a story about black people like if it was narrated by a black man. While Raymond did do his job in making a script, he did so in the typical way of how black people were represented during that time, less as actual people and more like caricatured Southern stereotypes, complete with white characters calling them darkies and using the same deep South dialect for the dialogue of characters like Uncle Remus that was used in the Harris book that even back then was considered to be highly controversial. The script was so bad in terms of black representation that the Hayes office, who was in charge of the motion picture production code, demanded a revision to take out those black nicknames, and even the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, and the American Council of Race Relations didn't even get a chance to look at it. Also, Clarence Muse, who was hired to be a writing consultant and wanted to play the role of Uncle Remus, ended up quitting the project because Raymond didn't care to consider any of his suggestions of portraying African Americans more respectfully. If Walt ever hoped to save the movie from turning Uncle Remus to Uncle Tom, then he needed another screenwriter who was capable of presenting black people as, well, people. When first asked, writer Maurice Rapp wasn't sure about the idea of working on an Uncle Remus movie. On top of being a writer for several live-action films, he was known for being an outspoken Jewish communist and completely resented the Uncle Tom imagery. However, that was exactly why Walt wanted to hire him. He would most likely be against Disney making this movie, so by bringing him on board as a writer, he could give the update the script needed to make the film more acceptable to create. The biggest change Rapp made to the writing was removing all the racist and outdated terminologies and replace them with clarification that the film is set during the Reconstruction era after slavery was abolished, including dialogue that emphasized that Uncle Remus is a free man. Unfortunately, Maurice's time with the feature did not last long. After working on the movie for 7 weeks, a major argument with Raymond resulted Raph to be out of the project and later worked to help write Cinderella. Ultimately, Morton Grant came on board to have the script settle in the middle of Raymond and Raph's vision, where the stereotypes and terminologies were thrown out, but so were the clear indications of its Reconstruction era setting, leaving the final film with almost unnoticeable hints of its period, including the late Victorian-style clothing, and in the lyrics of Let the Rain Pour Down, where they state that the black workers can leave whenever they want, but they choose to stay.
Let the rain pour down, let the cold wind blow, gonna stay right here in the hole mine, trouble, 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 fly away.
Other than Clarence Muse, Paul Robeson, Rex Ingram, and Eddie Rochester Anderson were all once considered to play the part of Uncle Remus, but the plans with any of them were ultimately dropped. But then came James Baskett, who previously voiced one of the crows from Dumbo and auditioned for the role of a talking butterfly. For Walt, his audition stood out in a way that he could do much more than just be a butterfly. So after meeting him in person and had him do some tests, Baskett not only got the part of the butterfly, but also the much bigger role of Uncle Remus and the additional part of the voice of Brer Fox.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just in a minute now. Won't be long now. Dinner gonna be ready in a minute now. All you have to do is put a few more sticks on the fire. Get the fire going good. Oh, excuse me. You just want to stay for dinner, ain't you, Brer Rabbit? We ain't want to take no excuses now. We just love to have you for dinner.
Other notable actors in the film include Bobby Driscoll's first Disney role, which also marked him as the first ever actor under contract with Disney, and legendary black actress Hattie McDaniel as Aunt Tempe. As the filming was done both in Hollywood at the Samuel Goldwyn Studio and in Phoenix, Arizona, where the team built a whole plantation to shoot, while the animators were at work creating the Brer Rabbit stories, the final filming day turned out to be an emergency. The team discovered that the scene where Uncle Remus starts to sing Zippity-Doo-Dah was badly shot and couldn't use it in the final film. With little budget to spare and desperate for an idea, Walt came up with a solution to start with a close-up of Uncle Remus during his monologue in the dark with cardboard covering the lights. Then, right when he starts singing, they remove the cardboard to reveal the background where he is now in the animated world, resulting in one of the most memorable scenes of the picture. And with all the shots, the animation, and the songs in place, Song of the South was ready to be moving along to theaters on November 20th, 1946. During the premiere 8 days prior at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, a few key players did not watch the movie during that time. Walt Disney bailed out after making an introduction to avoid seeing what the audience's reaction could be, and James Baskett was unable to be there in the first place due to the racial segregation laws in Atlanta at the time. But as it turned out, those reactions that Walt missed out on were... it certainly wasn't Disney's best. Even if the critics praised the animated segments and celebrated James Baskett's wonderful performance, they felt like it contained little of that magic that made Walt's animated films a classic. In fact, the New York Times described it best by using the amount of live action and animation in the film to say that it's the approximate ratio of its mediocrity and its charm. However, the other results did go better for the feature. At the box office, Disney made a minor profit as it earned $3.3 million, and after several re-releases in 1956, 1972, 1973, 1980, and 1986, the movie gathered a lifetime total of $65 million. It also went on to be recognized at the Academy Awards, where it received a nomination for Best Score and a win for Best Original Song with Zippity-Doo-Dah, along with a special Oscar for James Baskett for his role as Uncle Remus, making him the first ever Oscar-winning African-American man, and winning 2 juvenile Oscars for Bobby Driscoll and Luana Patton for their performances as Johnny and Ginny respectively. So it turned out that Song of the South was initially a small win for Disney. Not their best work, but still gained something out of it. But even with that gain, even if the crew was a bit worried that this could happen, nobody ever expected for this film to be the cause of controversy of historical proportions. The backlash started as early as the feature's release, where the executive secretary of the NAACP, Walter Francis White, released a statement that says, "The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People recognizes in Song of the South remarkable artistic merit in the music and in the combination of living actors and the cartoon technique. It regrets, however, that in an effort neither to offend audiences in the North or South, the production helps to perpetuate a dangerous glorified picture of slavery. Making use of the beautiful Uncle Remus folklore, Song of the South unfortunately gives the impression of an idyllic master-slave relationship, which is a distortion of the facts." But do you want to know something crazy about this quote? White never actually saw the movie when he said that. Believe it or not, this was the result of a complete misunderstanding. Instead of seeing it himself, he based his statement on memos written by two staffers who watched the film, Norma Jensen and Hope Springarn. One said that it was completely cliched, but still very well made, while the other was a bit hesitant with the way that the black characters talked. However, they both agreed that they were confused about the picture setting, that nowhere in the film did it ever clearly state that it was from the Reconstruction era, and that it would be too easy for people to mistakenly assume that the story is set during the time of slavery. But regardless of the broken telephone scenario, the damage was already done, and as the words of Walter Francis White was published in many major newspapers, it ignited the black communities of America to fight against Song of the South. Across several big American cities, protesters with signs gathered around movie theaters to discourage audiences from watching the film, accusing Disney of rewriting the history of slavery to make it look like black people were happy to be slaves. However, even with the backlash, Disney still moved on, and Song of the South went on to become a classic franchise, even becoming a star in the comic strips with Uncle Remus and his Tales of Brer Rabbit, where the comics were published every Sunday for nearly 30 years, starting a year before the movie's release in 1945 up to the end of 1972. But Brer Rabbit and the gang wouldn't make a true comeback to the spotlight until 1989, when Disney opened a new attraction at Disneyland called Splash Mountain, a log flume ride that features the animated stories from the film, with Jess Arnell being the new voice of Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox, while Nick Stewart reprised his role as Brer Bear. James Avery would later take his place for the voice. 3 years later, Tokyo Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World also got their own Splash Mountain, and with its approximate 50-foot drop and a simple concept of,
it's like a log ride, and you get inside the log ride and it goes up the hill, down the hill, makes a splash.
Which is perfect for those hot days, it quickly became one of the most popular attractions at the Disney parks. For many years, the Brers remained as classic members of the Disney animated family, with meet-and-greet characters walking around the parks, making appearances in the House of Mouse and the game Disneyland Adventures, and making cameos in movies like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Lion King 1.5. Even the movie got some love during that time, where the Online Film Critics Society ranked it at number 67 in the top 100 greatest animated films, and the American Film Institute placed Zippity Doo-Dah at number 47 in their top 100 movie songs. Not to mention that Disney frequently used that song across their divisions almost as much as When You Wish Upon a Star. However, there is one market that the movie didn't get a chance to get into, yet its absence serves as a reminder of its troubling controversies: home media. Throughout his time as CEO, Michael Eisner refused to distribute the feature on home media, where he felt that not even a disclaimer before the film could save them from the backlash. While it did come out on VHS and Laserdisc in places such as Japan and the UK, along with several other countries in Europe and Asia, the movie never received an official home media release or any kind in North America. Over the years, the company stuck with Eisner's plan and had since gradually tried to distance themselves from the feature altogether, and even with every new piece of media distribution, Disney still refused to give one for Song of the South, including DVDs, Blu-rays, digital, and even on Disney+. They tried to change the narrative by presenting the characters and the songs as if they originated from Splash Mountain, but that eventually did not last long, since in mid-2020, they announced that they were going to re-theme the attraction to The Princess and the Frog. And now that Disney ultimately decided to completely separate themselves from the feature, especially when the topic of black rights is becoming more of a major issue, we might never get a chance to see the stories of Uncle Remus and Brer Rabbit on a piece of American home media ever again.
Or can we? No. There is no way. It's for sure that Disney will never put the entire movie on home media. But the key word to what I just said there was the entire movie. That doesn't mean Brer Rabbit and Uncle Remus never appeared on a piece of American home media.
Sure, Disney never released Song of the South on VHS or DVD in North America, but there have been certain scenes that did find their way on an American cassette or disc. The most common way it did so was through Disney's sing-along songs, where some of the songs from the feature, like Zippity Doo Dah, How Do You Do, and Everybody's Got a Laughing Place, get their own segments across the series. And back in 1950, the entire animated scene where Uncle Remus sings Zippity Doo Dah and tells the story of Brer Rabbit earns $1 a minute was featured in Walt Disney's first television special, 1 Hour in Wonderland, which in 2004, Disney included the entire program as a bonus feature on the DVD of Alice in Wonderland, and was also featured on its later home media releases, including Blu-ray, making Alice in Wonderland the only time that Song of the South ever made an appearance on an official Disney Blu-ray. There are many ways that people view how Disney adapted the Uncle Remus stories. Some say it's a Disney movie that's mostly boring with some really good cartoons in between. Some say that it's the most racist thing Disney has ever done that promotes slavery. Some say it's where beloved songs like Zippity Doo Dah come from. And some say it's an awesome attraction with a lot of charm and a thrilling drop. But ultimately, Song of the South can be best described as Disney's biggest cautionary tale. How the lack of context of his setting resulted in confusion and frustration regarding a serious issue like race. And as the world's culture evolved to become more inclusive and diverse, the movie and its source material quickly became more outdated, resulting in Disney to abandon the feature altogether in order for the company to stay current with the modern times viewpoints. But even to this day, fans have often discussed whether if Disney should ever release the movie in its entirety in one way or another, where even people like Whoopi Goldberg and Disney animator Floyd Norman advocate to show the movie to the public. There will be those that want it released and those that want it gone for good, but either way, these discussions are proof that no matter how hard Disney tries, they can never hide their history. Especially when it comes to the feature that has the title of the most controversial Disney film of all time.
In conclusion, the greatest story from Walt Disney Animation Studios does not come from any of their feature films, but rather, it is their own. A story that dates back to 1923, where it all started with one man's dream and has since become responsible for some of the most groundbreaking innovations of the medium and for creating many of the greatest animated features of all time. There were some dark times and they had to face their own struggles, but there were also highlights that helped push the studio to place them among the best in the industry. It is a story of determination, hope, creativity, teamwork, trust, and passion that is filled with many unforgettable characters across the years, all united with the same dream that Walt had many decades ago. And as long as the studio is still doing what they do best since the beginning, this is a story that will continue to add new chapters that will still inspire millions for generations to come. As much as we will all remember characters from Snow White herself to Elsa from Frozen, The best Disney characters are the people that brought them to life, like the writers, directors, animators, artists, actors, songwriters, editors, and the creative team that contributed to the biggest and most important legacy in animation. If there is a lesson to be learned from this story, it's that dreams can come true and that the magic of Disney is certainly real. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see you later, dudes.